Hey everybody, it's Curse, and today I'm going to bless you with my Lightning Blast, Ice Barrage, Frostbite build. I absolutely love playing Lightning Blast. I think it's one of the best design skills in the game, both aesthetically, and the skill tree is really cool as well. There's a lot of interaction with items, with other skills. It's just a phenomenal skill overall. You've already seen some of my other build guides that utilize Lightning Blast, and all of them have been lightning so far. In today's build guide, it's going to be a cold damage and Runemaster instead of Sork. So I hope you enjoy it. We do utilize a bug, however, in the Lightning Blast skill tree. So use it at your own peril. Anyways, let's jump in and irashaimase. Alright, so today we're going to start off the build guide a little bit differently than usual. We're going to go over Lightning Blast and some of the mechanics with Lightning Blast, especially to do with chains, as well as some of the nodes in the other skill trees that interact with Lightning Blast. So to start things off, Lightning Blast on its own is just a single zap. It does a bunch of damage, it procs ailments, it does all of that, but then you can unlock chains that essentially zap from the initial targets to other targets. And so chain lightning right here, for example, adds, in my case, 3 additional chains. It can hit 4 targets in total, and it cannot go back to the initial target or to any other target twice. And on top of that, it adds mana cost as well. However, if you add this node right here, Convergence, it makes it so that Lightning Blast is now not an AoE skill, but it becomes a single target skill, where it chains only to the first target hit. However, the maximum chains gets reduced by half rounded up. So this plus 3 becomes 1.5 rounded up 2. So what that means is instead of hitting a single target with 1 Lightning Blast zap, we actually end up hitting them with 3 different zaps. And so that's pretty good. Triple damage with just these 4 points invested. Even better, if you invest another 4 points into Arcing Power, you can increase that number of zaps by an additional 2 as long as you are direct casting Lightning Blast. And so you end up hitting a single target 5 times, which is 5 times the damage. And that's incredibly powerful. That is what makes Lightning Blast such a good single target spell for Sork and for Runemaster. And now let's discuss some of the nodes that interact with Lightning Blast and with these chains. And so let's start with some of the ones up here. Front loaded. It reads that Lightning Blast deals essentially double damage when you put 5 points into this node. However, that bonus gets reduced by 25% for each additional chain. So theoretically then, by the 5th chain, that 5th chain should be doing half the damage of the first initial hit. And based on my testing, that less bonus damage per chain does not apply, at the very least, to Frostbite. I can cast Lightning Blast without this bonus of 4 additional chains, so it will hit things 3 times. Then I can trigger a few Lightning Blasts without hitting anything, and then cast it again, and that's going to add 2 more chains. And the damage goes up by roughly a factor of 5 divided by 3. Meaning that front-loaded is applying to every single Lightning Blast hit and every single chain at the full bonus damage, at the very least for my Frostbites. I'm not sure whether this is the case for the actual crits or for the actual hits. I haven't tested that out. That's a little bit trickier to test because the numbers are just so numerous. It's just kind of hard to track. But with Frostbite, it's pretty trivial to test out. Next, let's look at Innate Conduit. This one, it says out of mana cost 0. However, if you're out of mana, it's supposed to not chain. And again, this node is bugged as well. It chains, even if you're out of mana, which is why I'm using it, even with a 12 mana cost Lightning Blast. And so this is a pretty big bug that we're abusing here. So keep that in mind. And so take the build with a grain of salt. It's going to get nerfed at some point. However, what's really cool here is this 0 cost when I'm out of mana, Lightning Blast interacts really well with other aspects of the build. Like for example, Unsealed Mana here, where if you cast 3 skills in a row that cost 0 mana, you get a burst of mana. And Lightning Blast, once you're out of mana, is 0 cost. So it's going to replenish your mana quite effectively just because of that fact that you're now in the negatives. Another one to note is Closed Circuit here. So this one doesn't really work with Convergence, but if you're against a single target, the way that this one works, it is only going to bounce to that single target and back to you, and that's it. It won't be hitting that single target over and over again and hitting you back over and over again. So make sure to keep that in mind when you're thinking about your Lightning Blast builds. And now let's look at some of the other skills that can buff up Lightning Blast, starting with Static Orb. Static Orb has this Fusion Blast node right here, which says that for the next, up to 5 Lightning Blast casts, you should be getting an additional of 2 chains. And if you recall, with Convergence, we divide those 2 chains by 2. And so we should be getting 1 additional hit with every single Lightning Blast for the next 5 Lightning Blasts. However, that's not the case. That does not happen in practicality. If I have 5 points in this node, and then I cast 2 Lightning Blasts, that's it. That's the 2 Lightning Blasts that are going to get the benefit from this node. It does not apply to the next 5. So this is a pretty major bug. It's not working as intended. I'm not sure that it's counting the chains perhaps and counting them as Lightning Blast themselves or what exactly is going on. But this one is definitely bugged and it's just not worth using ever in its current state. Next, we have a brand new skill in Glyph of Dominion with Runemaster introduced in 0.92. And Glyph of Dominion has this really cool sounding Tendrils of the Invoker, where if you're standing on your glyph, you get +1 up to +3 Lightning Blast additional chains. However, these additional chains are supposed to consume up to 6 mana per chain. And now the way that it's worded, you might think that the mana consumption is applied only on the incremental chains. But no, that's not the case. Every single chain that Lightning Blast procs, including ones from your Chain Lightning tree, ones from your Arcing Power tree, every single one of those is going to consume mana from these Tendrils of the Invoker. So when you get to 2 or 3 points of this node, it becomes kind of untenable to keep casting Lightning Blast. It gobbles up your mana so quickly, it's just ridiculous. So this node, the way it's implemented, it's just not ideal. Not only that, when you read additional chains on Glyph, the +3, you might think that it gets divided by 2 from Convergence, but it actually doesn't. It's a pure +3 chains. So if you have +2 here and +2 here for a total of 5 Lightning Blast hits, adding Glyph of Dominion's 3 points here is going to give you another 3 additional chains, making for 8 Lightning Blast hits. It's absolutely ridiculous and quite spectacular to behold as well. On top of that, you could even add the 1 or extra one from Fusion Blast for 1 or 2 Lightning Blast casts. So that would make it a total of 9 hits. So that would be pretty memey. However, those 9 hits, 8 of those will be chains. They'll consume 6 mana each, and that will be 48 mana consumed just from those chains, just from one single Lightning Blast cast. So imagine just trying to spam that. It's just not happening. So Tendrils of the Invoker is also pretty bugged. I hope that one gets fixed because I think a lot of cool builds can be made utilizing Glyph of Dominion as something of a support skill for Lightning Blast. But other than that, there's also Static, which can proc Lightning Blast every second. And this one, I think, does work kind of as you read it. The only thing to note is Zap takes 10 charges down to 5 and then plus another 5. Plus the cost of Lightning Blast is each one of those mana points becomes a charge cost. So in my case, having a 12 mana cost, that ends up being something like a 20 charge cost per Lightning Blast. And I don't really have a solid way of charging up Static, so this is not a usable node for me. However, in some builds, maybe you can utilize it. I think it's a pretty low value, 1 Lightning Blast every second. There's also Arcane Ascendance, which procs Lightning Blast automatically up here. and you can increase the frequency for something roughly 1 point something seconds. And then we also have Frost Wall, which is something that I am using, in fact, for my current build, which procs Lightning Blast every 2 seconds. It says Lightning Blast mana consumption 100%, but that is totally not true. It does not consume any mana. So this one seems kind of bugged as well. So there is some pretty good synergy between Frost Wall and Lightning Blast because of this node right here. And not only that, but it casts 2 Lightning Blasts every 2 seconds from each of the 2 endpoints of the Frost Wall, which is pretty strong. It's basically a Lightning Blast every second, and it is such that you don't really need to, gather charges. You don't need to expend too much to keep those Lightning Blast casts going. So one minor bug in Frost Wall. Then we have Disintegrate, in which you can proc Lightning Blasts from your Disintegrate with 100% certainty once every second. And it consumes Lightning Blast mana cost. This one works as intended. It does consume that mana cost. And the cool part about Disintegrate is that you can get 2 beams, and each of those beams is going to proc a Lightning Blast. And that's really neat in my opinion. I love how they've implemented that. So you get 2 Lightning Blasts every second. On top of that, you can spec into infinite mana regen with laser focus and hyperfocal. Basically, these can be something along the lines of 60 mana per second or maybe 80 mana per second because of the fact that you get 2 beams. So each of those beams gives you mana per second damaging enemies. So it's just a really good synergy between Lightning Blast and these mana generating nodes right here. I actually tried this Disintegrate setup with Lightning Blast first before I landed on this current version, but that one didn't work. It was just a little bit too clunky. Channeling, it's just not great in its current state. I think channeling needs some love from EHG, so we'll see what they do with it. So that's what I wanted to cover in terms of a lot of these various Lightning Blast interactions with other skills. I've done tons of testing to arrive at all of these conclusions. I don't have time to showcase all of them. It's already quite a bit of time to just highlight all of these. Let's go into the actual build, and let's talk about the 5 skills that we have chosen here, starting with Lightning Blast, which is our main single target DPS. Against AoE or against trash mobs, we won't rely purely on Lightning Blast, but let's go over Lightning Blast skill tree here. We go the usual Convergence just because it's such a phenomenal single target DPS, and we're going to be casting Lightning Blast manually or directly, so we also go Arcing Power. And now we're running a Frostbite build, so ailments, which means that on-hit bonuses like Shatter Shock, which is great for on-hit builds and crit builds, is actually not good for our current situation with the Frostbite build. However, front-loaded is just as good, and it's kind of bugged, so it doesn't seem to reduce the damage bonus per chain. So we definitely utilize that. Innate Conduit seems to be bugged as well. And it also overcomes our mana issues that we have because of our weapon choices, which I'll go over later. And then if you go into Overcharge and Hypercharge, I would like to spec into those with +3 skills on my helmet at some point, or maybe +2, taking 1 point out of here. These 2 maxed out, so 5 points, that's something like 36% more damage. It's a pretty solid boost in DPS. But yeah, the use case of Lightning Blast is single target. For AoE, we very much rely on Ice Barrage as well as Frost Wall. So starting with Ice Barrage, the most important thing is Frost Armor to get 60% more global cold damage. That's going to boost all of your Frostbites, including from Lightning Blast, from Frost Wall, and just everything. It's a really strong node right here. Then we want to increase the duration and go into Sublimation, which is just a solid damage boost overall. And I can show you also a quick little trick. Ideally, if you're running a lot of monos, you want to spec into Wintry Blast. Wintering Blast is the best mono clear in the game. You can just cast your Ice Barrage and just run forward. Wintry Blast is going to fire 5 Barrage Icicles per shot, and all of those 5 are going to shoot out and just clear every single clump of mobs or just single target mobs ahead of you, and it's just a very smooth mono experience. So this is the best node for mono clear. However, if you go into a boss, all you need to do is right before the boss, go and respec, remove points, and pop this out. I'm currently trying out and seeing how I feel without Wintering Blast, but I strongly recommend if you're running a lot of monos in a day, use Wintering Blast, and if you're going to be running, let's say, a lot of Julra, then you might want to spec it out and just put an extra points into Looming Frost. So these two are the interchangeable points that I utilize in my build. Unfortunately, going into Nailed Shot and Hypothermia, it might seem like a good idea for a Frostbite build, but it's such a big investment, I very much believe it is not worth it. 3 points just to unlock, and then it only counts for when you pierce, so you kind of probably want 5 points, and then it doesn't work with Ice Shatters on hit. You're better off with Ice Shards Shatter on hit. This is even better AoE just because they explode and deal a lot of damage behind them. And so 5 shards with all the 5 explosions can clear a huge pack so easily. Our third damage dealing skill is Frost Wall. And that's because we spec into Charged Violence, and so it's casting 2 lightning blasts every 2 seconds. And that frequency can go up if enemies pass through it, but you know, I wouldn't count on this happening too often. In monos, this is likely to trigger more often than, let's say, boss fights. And then we get some Frostbite chance, with which Frostwall becomes a surprisingly good skill at clearing trash mobs, because they end up being stuck inside the frost wall and they just die. Mana regen is a big problem for the build, so we want Crystals of Protection maxed out, some Haste Frenzy, and of course Prepared Wards. This is basically your get out of jail free card, your emergency defense layer button right here. If you need defenses, you go through your Frost Wall and you get your Flame Ward triggered, and that's it. Cleanse as well. 5% more multiplicative bonus damage to chilled enemies is solid as well. But yeah, that's about it. This is what Frostwall is about. Flame Wards and extra Lightning Blasts, as well as Ailment Clear. The Flame Ward that gets triggered, we've spec'd it into extra duration. We've purposefully avoided converting it to cold so that we can have cold, fire, cold, and then proccing Frostguard for our Runic Invocation. Back to the Flame Ward skill tree. We max out the best 2 nodes here in Barrier and Prismatic Buffer. These are the best 2 defensive nodes in the skill tree. We want to grab as much mana efficiency as we can, just because of the 250% Flame Ward mana multiplier in Frostwall. And then we also get a little bit extra mana regen with Warmth, which is essentially, for the roughly 4-second duration that we have, is about 8 mana per point. So 32 mana in total. So during that 4 seconds, you kind of get your mana back. It's really solid for mana sustain. And together with some mana regen on rings and amulets perhaps, the build can function quite smoothly, despite the high mana costs of a lot of its skills. And finally, Runic Invocation. This, in our build right now, serves 2 purposes. The first one is to cast Frostguard thanks to Immutable Order, which locks up the order of the 3 runes that we have on top of our head. And it is based on the first 3 skills, skipping over Runic Invocation. So it's cold, fire, cold, and that is Frostguard. And the next purpose of Runic Invocation is to actually use it as a teleport mobility skill. And I'm not sure how the numbers work out here, but +5 cooldown here and +12 cooldown here should be +17 in total. But somehow I have a 7.1 second cooldown on my Runic Invocation. Not sure exactly how. I do have some cooldown recovery speed here and on my belt, but I don't think I have enough to make it down to 7.1. Anyways, we also get a little bit of Elementalist's Call, and it gives us some elemental penetration. So ideally, I like to cast Runic Invocation followed up by Ice Barrage in mono clears, and I think that's a pretty good setup. And you can just mostly run through once you do that, because Ice Barrage just wipes everything. And so that's the skill setup that we have here. Alright, and now let's talk about items. And this is honestly my favorite part of the build, because I'm utilizing some really funky choices here. In terms of a 2-handed sword on a Runemaster that casts spells. Yeah, I had a lot of fun with it. But anyway, starting with the core items for the build, the most core are Frostbite Shackles and Snowdrift Boots. You cannot run this build without these two. They synergize so incredibly well. And starting with Frostbite Shackles in particular, it gives you ward retention per uncapped cold res, tons of Frostbite duration on hit Frostbite, even freeze rate multi, which gives you cold pen. And ward gain on freeze is not bad either. In terms of prefixes, the best in slot is a tier 7 armor shred for Frostbite Shackles. If you can get that, the next best choice, if you happen to have a 2 LP, high roller Frostbite Shackles, you have a bunch of solid options. Freeze rate multi is not bad. Strength's not bad. Int's not bad. Even leech rate is not bad, because we do struggle finding leech rate with this build. Hybrid health is never bad. Cold res is not bad. Cast speed is not bad. So you have quite a few solid options, but by far the best option for the tier 7 that you want to plug into your Frostbite Shackles is a tier 7 armor shred. I ran the numbers and that's the conclusion I came to. Next we have Snowdrifts. And the reason these boots are so amazing for Frostbite builds is the 2% cold pen with Frostbite per 10% freeze rate multi. And it's quite easy with most Sorc or Runemaster builds to get upwards of 2,000, maybe even 3,000 freeze rate multi. That translates to 400, 500, 600% cold pen with Frostbite. Yeah, that's 5x, 6x the damage with Frostbite. You must run these in any Frostbite build. And in terms of ideal prefixes and suffixes, if you're really lucky, you probably want a tier 7 move speed on these, just because we're super slow. They only have 11% MS. They have some MS per 2 decks, but we don't have any decks with this build. So you really want to be getting your MS from the prefixes. If you happen to have a 2 LP Snowdrift, you have, again, lots of good options. Armor is not bad. Cold res is not bad. Int, strength, both solid. And the reason I keep saying strength is for armor purposes. Armor protects our ward, so we want to stack that up at least to some extent. For the next core item, I want to highlight my favorite Twisted Heart of Eukaros. And this is just to get extra ward. It gives you elemental spell skill levels as well. Strength for armor, cast speed. You just can't go wrong. It even gives you 20% health. And you can see in my courtesy of a Wheezy here, I've got a 30% cast speed Twisted Heart. And I think in this case, there might be some slightly better options other than tier 7 cast speed. However, I do believe tier 7 cast speed produces the most all-round Twisted Heart of Eukaros that you can plug into the most number of builds. Tier 7 int is probably decent as well in terms of being able to interchangeably switch it from this build into another build. Tier 7 elemental damage over time is probably what's best for this particular build, but that's a much more niche prefix that won't be as useful for other builds. So you're basically kind of making a single use Heart of Eukaros in that scenario, which I don't like doing. I want to make my items as interchangeable as possible, especially given how hard it is to get a tier 7 Heart of Eukaros. And for the next core item, and in this case, it's not really core, but I want to make it core just because of the cool factor. It's the two-handed weapon that we're using. And the primary purpose of it is to get as much armor shred as possible. If you do the math, you don't have very many sources of armor shred with Runemaster and Sorc. And so the main sources are your gloves and amulet. And if you get those, you're kind of capped out. If you're using a wand or staff, you can't really get armor shred from wands and staves. Your idols don't have armor shred, unlike, let's say, rogue idols and sentinel idols. So you can't get too much armor shred in order to convert it into frostbite chance. And this tier 7 armor shred of 640% max on a two-handed weapon more than doubles your frostbite chance. The trade-off, however, is that you cannot get cast speed as a prefix, and you cannot get elemental dot as a prefix, and you cannot get the -3 mana cost. The most significant one of those might be the -3 mana cost as an implicit, but the cast speed can hurt as well depending on your itemization. The way that we mitigate that is through the usage of Lightning Blast, proccing Lightning Ages, and then using these phenomenal arcane idols, which give us, up to 19% cast speed. And I think we can fit, in best case scenario, we can fit 3 of these. So that would be 57% cast speed, which is solid altogether, and more than compensates for the low cast speed because of the fact that we're using a two-handed sword. We're also compensating for the mana issues with this innate conduit, so there's some synergy there. And that's how we enable this extremely high Frostbite proccing and high DPS build with a two-handed weapon, despite the weaknesses of using a two-handed weapon. Now, the best two-handed weapon you can hope for, in my opinion, is Tier 7 Armor Shred, Tier 5 Dot for prefix, and Tier 5 Cold Damage for prefix. On the fourth and final suffix, I think reduced bonus damage taken from critical strikes is quite nice. You could probably mitigate that through your armor pieces, but this just makes things a lot easier because the passive in the Runemaster skill tree right here, Mental Catalyst, doesn't work for us because we're not using a catalyst. So we cannot get bonus damage from crits mitigated with this node right here. The implicits on my two-handed sword, however, are not great. They provide nothing whatsoever. And so the best implicits, I would say, Ice Axe is decent. It gives you up to 130% cold damage. This Spear is decent as well for an implicit, 15% Elemental Pen. However, keep in mind that this is additive with our Cold Pen from Frostbite, right, from the boots. So it's actually not going to be very significant at all. Just an honorable mention here. Cold Res from this two-handed sword is decent because that converts into 45% ward retention. So that's nice. But I do believe the best two-handed weapon choice is Titan Femur for the 32 strength. That is 128% armor. That's no joke. If you happen to get the right prefixes and suffixes on a Titan Femur, that's my recommendation for best in slot. And if you're absolutely crazy, I actually do believe Baldur's Wrath is a decent option as well. If you get 400% armor shred and 1 or 2 LP, and you can slam the tier 7 armor shred, making it 1040% armor shred on hit, that's 10.4 stacks of Frostbite per hit. It's absolutely hilarious as well, just walking around with your Baldur's Wrath. Check that out. Epic, right? I can't pull the trigger on a 208% armor shred boulder, however, as much as I would love to. It's just not as good as this two-handed sword. But if one day I get a 1 LP Baldur's Wrath with 400% armor shred, I will definitely consider it. Especially for a 2 LP with a high strength roll, you better believe that it's happening. And just to demonstrate, check out my armor with and without the boulders, which is a 27 strength boulder, so it's not even the max. It goes from 3200 to 4400. The DR goes from 63 to 70. So it's definitely a solid option if you happen to have like a crazy 1 or 2 OP Baldur's Wrath. Unfortunately, the Baldur's Wrath effective level for Legendary Potential is extremely high. So you have a very hard time getting a 1 or 2 LP boulders. But this is definitely the highest style point item that you can get. So other than the weapon choice, next it's more straightforward with all the other items. You want to prioritize Elemental Dot, Freeze Rate Multi on the prefixes, as well as Cold Res on the suffixes, while of course maxing out all of your resistances and getting armor where you can in your belt, chest, and helmet. It is a must-have to have a shred armor on your amulet. That is the most important element of all of these items right here. You just want to get as many options for proccing Frostbite as possible. For your chest piece, apply Frostbite with cold skills is nice as well. Same with your helmet. Cold pen with Frostbite is a good option, I would recommend sealing one of these two as a tier 1 just because they don't grow as much as you would think from tier 1 to tier 5. So you don't lose very much if you just seal it at level 1 and utilize those extra slots in the prefixes for something else. For example, I would like to have a tier 5 lightning blast for the +2 skills on my prefixes on my helmet. Even tier 6 wouldn't hurt tier 7. And on the chest piece, you could consider getting a tier 5 Ice Barrage. Tier 5 mana is nice, just to be able to hit that 300 mana breakpoint. But yeah, those are the kind of prefixes and suffixes that you want to aim for across your other gear pieces. And one more thing I want to mention for items is I do believe getting some tier 5 mana regen on rings would be ideal, probably together with the elemental dot prefixes, just because mana is frequently a problem with the build. Having that extra mana regen would make it a lot smoother. You frequently end up staying at negative mana and waiting to get exactly 1 point of mana to cast Frost Wall or Ice Barrage because you don't want to take up that mana with Lightning Blast and shoot it and end up at negative 11 mana, because then you end up waiting even longer to get your Frost Wall and your Ice Barrage up. So if you can reduce that wait time from, let's say, your -3 mana to your +1 mana, that would make the build a lot smoother. And then in terms of idols, the best ones are the arcane idols that give you cast speed, as well as the Frostbite duration grand idols. You probably want to prioritize those heavily. And then make sure to have a Throne of Ambition for the 2% more cold damage per stack. Those stack up to 20 times for 40% more cold damage multiplicatively, as well as 40% more armor in total for a long boss fight, or if you can be zoomy enough to keep hitting elites through your monolith fighting, which is actually feasible with Ice Barrage, and it's like 2-3 screen reach. And then other than that, just fill out the remaining of your spaces with res maxing idols. You can see I have some void, some necrotic, some physical idols, just to bump those up to 75. And ideally, if you can fill those res through your rings and other slots, you can open up a spot here for an additional increased cast speed while we have Lightning Edges idle. Something else that you probably noticed with the build is that we don't stack intelligence anywhere. And the reason for that is we haven't spec'd into any of the strong intelligence passive nodes, like this one that gives us crit chance, because we don't need crit chance. We haven't spec'd into the cooldown reduction intelligence nodes. And intelligence overall gives us a 4% additive damage on top of anything that's elemental dot damage. And elemental dot damage is the highest rolling damage type in the game for all the prefixes, meaning that it kind of dwarfs the incremental bonus that you get from int damage bonuses, for example. Take a look at this prefix of 110% elemental dot and compare that to, let's say, 8 int, which is the maximum you can get from a tier 5 int prefix. 8 int would be 32% damage. So this prefix is 3.5 times more damage. The only other thing to mention is we are foregoing a ton of ward retention because of our low intelligence, but we have a solution for that as well, and that is in our Frostbite shackles. Just by stacking cold res, we can actually supplement our low ward retention and get it up to respectable numbers. My current setup needs a lot more ward retention, I'll say that much, but with optimized itemization, you can get pretty respectable 500% ward retention, I believe. We can quickly go over the passives. Currently, I've set up some int and fire and lightning res, most importantly through here, just to get those resistances maxed out easier. I'm actually getting ward retention from Warden. That's how much we need the ward retention. Cast speed, converting lightning blast to cold right here, so that we don't have to waste skill points for supercharged flows. We heavily invest into the Sork skill tree as well. And let's mention Chill to the Bone. 1.5% cold damage leech is our only source of leech and health regen, really, which makes it quite difficult to sustain the Twisted Heart health conversion. And so I'll show you in the blessings how we supplement this leech a little bit. But yeah, we must get this leech for this build to function. Armor and mana is great. Cast speed is solid. Spellblade we actually end up investing quite heavily into as well. Just for the freeze rate multipliers between these two nodes, it's exactly 300%, which translates to 60% cold pan for our Frostbite. It's a significant damage boost, I believe. So essentially we end up investing 17 points between these four nodes for 60% cold pan as well as 300% freeze rate multi, which is quite nice for stun locking Julra, for example. But I believe it's a decent trade-off. Finally, the Runemaster skill tree. This is the saddest 100 level Runemaster skill tree that you're ever going to see. We don't even invest a single point past the halfway point right here. I did have some points into Decree of the Burning Wind, even into Brand of Deception earlier. However, I ended up taking them out and investing them elsewhere. I'm still trying a few things out. And even this one right here, Transcendence, is not ideal. I mean, we don't even have 60 intelligence, so we're not getting the benefit of plus 24 ward per second. The main purpose of this part of the skill tree is Freezing Point to get us Armor Shred converted to Frostbite, but exactly 7 points, because 7% for 1 point passive point is just not that amazing. And then Arcane Focus is really solid for the 40 ward gain per direct spellcast, and we spam Lightning Blast quite a bit, so it's a solid ward gain. And finally, Unsealed Mana. I already mentioned it earlier. The cast speed's nice, but more importantly, the mana burst when casting 0 mana spells. Great synergy with our out of mana cost 0 Lightning Blast. Now let's check out the blessings real quick. The most interesting one choice is right here on Black Sun. I just thought about how can I get more leech with this build, and there aren't very many options. Getting the spell leech from Black Sun doesn't help us because we don't do any spell damage. Frostbite is an ailment. And so I ended up getting this 50% leech rate, which boosts our leech from 1.5% to 2.25. It's not crazy, it's not great, but it's something to keep that Heart of Eukaros sustained. The best in slot for ending the storm is freeze rate multi, 300%. That's again 60% cold pan. Definitely go for this one here. 20% cold res because we don't need crit avoidance. We're getting our bonus crit damage reduced from our weapon mainly. And then we go for double armor. So those are the blessings. Now I'll quickly cover how you want to play the build. You want to get your 3 runes, and after you have them, you can Runic Invocation, which casts Frost Guard. And after that, immediately get your Ice Barrage up and just run forward. Ice Barrage is going to kill everything in front of you in most cases until you reach a little bit higher corruption. And the occasional elite or straggler that survived somehow, you can Lightning Blast, and then again, similar thing. You can utilize Frostwall as well. While you're running, cast Frostwall, walk through it. It will give you haste and Flame Ward, which will give you mana regen. However, you do need a lot of mana regen to actually make this run smoothly, because Frostwall and Flame Ward are quite pricey. Same as Ice Barrage, very expensive to cast. So in monos, I'm a lot more reserved with my usage of Lightning Blast. Whereas against bosses, that's when you just go all out and you just spam it. You can see all the procs. You get another Frost Wall spamming, extra Lightning Blast as well. And of course, you want to be spamming those after Ice Barrage because that gives you a 60% more cold damage multiplier applied to your Lightning Blast Frostbites as well. There's great synergy among all of these skills here. These 3, Frost Wall, Lightning Blast, and Ice Barrage. The DPS among those 3 is super solid. I can easily get 1.5 mil ticks on the dummy with those. The main weakness of the build is mana regen. So get a little bit of mana regen to smooth that out. Now let's go over the final verdict for the build. You can see it up here on row 3, Frostbite, Lightning Blast. You saw in the intro that we killed Julra in 24 seconds. However, that Julra had 300% extra health, and that is pretty much the lowest amount you can get. So it was an easier kill than it should have been. So I put a range of 25 to 35. Realistically though, if you really optimize the itemization, I'm sure you can get something like sub 20 reliable Julra kills consistently. So I put it at S- tier for that. Monolith chill farming, you can really push it with this build. That's why I put such a big range, 400 to 800. You'll see in the outro, I have a 386 corruption monolith farming, and it's really easy, mostly because of Ice Barrage. Good use of Ice Barrage makes monolith farming very trivial and fun, and zoomy as well. I did put the mobility at B, however, because the cooldown to our mobility skill is 7 seconds. So overall, I have it at tier A+. Survivability is solid. I have A+ for it. You can definitely push it with better itemization even higher, perhaps S-. Multiplayer utility, I put it at B. Cost to itemize, I have A-. You do require the boots, the gloves, even Heart of Eukeros. So final tier, I have A+. The build is really solid. It does utilize a bug, however. So keep in mind it will get nerfed at some point because of the chaining when you have negative mana for Lightning Blast. But overall, the build is super fun. So there you have it. And congrats, you made it to the end of the build guide. I'll leave you with a Corruption 386 Monolith clear. Just keep in mind that the character is really slow because we don't have movement speed in our boots. If you can slam tier 7 MS in your snowdrifts, you're off to the races. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the build guide. If you did, please do like and subscribe. It does help the channel, and if you're curious and you want to watch more of my progress as we try out different builds, check out my Twitch. I stream 3 to 4 nights a week. For the next few build guides, I want to try out a few different iterations of this kind of Frostbite build. Just keep in mind that I'm going to pivot only slightly. Most of the itemization will remain as is, and it will be a good benchmark to see which damage skills perform better versus Lightning Blast. I'm planning on trying out Glacier, Frostbite, as well as Frostclaw Frostbite. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'll try to keep the next one much shorter than this one. And with that, gochiso sama deshita.